All right, shall we?
Yes. Do you want me to start? So yeah, we were already talking a little bit. So I've already given one secret about myself away. I am from Switzerland. But I'm an associate director at BOI since quite a while now, working on AI strategy. So defining where and what big bets to take as a company with AI, but also taking that really tangibly. And that's what we're going to focus on today, on building AI solutions. And my passion and my focus is typically within the B2B or more like less front end CPG facing. So I'll hopefully bring some of the experiences from the trenches there. But obviously, super happy to have Christian also here with me. We've been working together a lot. But yeah, I'll pass on the word to you, Christian.
Yes, we have, Emily. My name is Christian. I am an associate director at BOI as well. I have a focus in applied AI strategy and builds. So that's what we'll be talking to today. I'm here in the big bad New York City. And with that, I think we can get into it. Let us know if you have any questions in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on it. So who are we? Where do we work? We work at BOI, where we are specialists in AI strategy and build. We try to focus on some of the more extreme and boundary pushing growth use cases for some of the biggest companies in the world that you can see there. Today, the objective is for us to share learning stories and examples from our experience, and we're trying to take the edge off a little bit. This is just us sharing what we've learned. These are not instructions on how to build, but we did feel that we've been building AI for a while now, and we had things that can be worth listening to. So actually, before I jump to here, quick learning. I'm going to walk through some of the things we've worked on. Some of those things Emily and I have worked on together. It's a GIF, and there might be careful, like motion sickness warning. I'll fly through these. Some of the things we've built are innovation engines that come up with ideas and actually then convert them into factory-ready sort of outputs, which you can see there. All of these are heavily anonymized, by the way. We have helped companies project opportunities. This is something that we find really adding a lot of value to strategic decisions. We've helped people forecast far into the future the demand that they will see in their category. And we have helped companies that have products in the market do instant comparisons to their entire competitive set so that they can actually optimize the way that they both produce, evolve, and market those products. The structure of the presentation today, we'll be walking through a typical build path. We will be going into each of these in depth, but the overall takeaways are that we, when thinking about use cases, we want to see high growth, previously impossible capabilities. We find that custom built tools are better for unique advantage, unique competitive advantage specifically. Naturally, and we'll go into a little more detail, but you want to keep business and tech teams in sync. We find that people tend to overrate today's internal data. We'll go into a little more detail on data. When we're looking to design products where we find people maybe don't spend enough time, there are ways you can go deeper on context and think about creating those outcomes for users. And finally, you always want to start small, but know the path to scale. For those of you hunting for a screenshot, I'll show this again at the end, so you can have that for your notes. The overall theme of these ideas is that we see people not thinking big enough, and we're pushing people to think bigger. You want to think big on your vision. Where are we going? You want to think outside the box on some of the details and how things are implemented. And you want to think broadly about context because of some of the capabilities that recent advances in AI has unlocked. So let's start with use cases, hunting for high growth, previously impossible capabilities. We find that teams typically start by trying to do what they already do more easily, but a big part of the promise of AI is you can actually generate growth while making today's pain points, while alleviating today's pain points. So some provocations to help you push in that direction are, do you have a skilled labor bottleneck in your business that could unlock opportunities? We see a lot of overworked skilled teams that maybe could be supported in different ways with AI. Do you have that idea you've always known would really help you compete, a moonshot capability that relates fundamentally to your business model and how you do business? Is there a really painful, inefficient workflow, so what you do today, but it has data or could have data that you could use to make better strategic decisions and grow revenue? And finally, is there a strategic task that you really want to do, but it always is just too difficult or would take too long to be worth the effort? I'm curious in the chat, let us know if any of these resonate in terms of helping you think bigger, or if they relate to some of the work maybe that you're doing today. All four, love it, Oscar. So yeah, these are great ways to really push that thinking. As for our sort of example here on this last one, we created this demand forecasting tool, and I'm going to jump off this slide again so it doesn't give you motion sickness. But we created a tool that really helped people look further. We have maybe a foresighting capability, but by putting this type of long-term thinking into everyone's hands, it really can help teams anticipate where the market's going. So when identifying a new use case, we also have seen that leaders can sometimes be paralyzed at the top level. Maybe they have a lot of people, bottom-up ideas on where they might want to apply AI. There's easy sort of back of the napkin, as we like to say, ways of thinking about this, and those ROI, but it comes down to those ROI buckets. Where can we do what we do today for faster or for less? How can we use the same products? How can we optimize our revenue using the same products for the same customers? And where can we really unlock future growth by creating new products or having new customers? Now, one note here, often this is a good way if you are lower and if you are sort of pitching to a manager, this is a good way to frame it. But it's critical in order to get organizational momentum to really have that top-down buy-in. So what does a t-shirt sizing mean, and why do I say you can do it on the back of a napkin? Here's why. Really, you take these different buckets, you list out your use cases, and then you just, the t-shirt size, you pick small, medium, large, extra large, and this can give you a pretty good view and comparison if you have a lot of use cases. Naturally, you'll need to have a deeper analysis of what the business impact could be, but this is a great place to start. With that, I'll pass it over.
Thank you. I'll take you through. So obviously we now have a good idea of what are the use cases we want to build for, and we know which one are actually going to drive maybe that new growth revenue that Christian was talking about. I think one of the other learnings is once we get into working on that actual use case is deciding, how do I actually build it? Is it something that I go off the shelf, or do I make a custom build for that use case? And obviously, like I'll share, and this is we have really like very relevant rationale for choosing a custom build over over actually getting it off the shelf. But if you continue, just wanting to give you a bit our 4 main, I would say, rule of thumb on where and when you should go for a custom build. And I think it's really important to take this very strategically, because as you know, the AI model landscape is changing every 3 months. So if you take a decision to make something custom, it really also has to tick the boxes. And so this is a bit the tick of the box that we'll give you. So the first one is, I think this is really important for a lot of companies. If you are building a custom build, it does allow you to access new IP potentially and drive a competitive advantage in your company. So that's definitely an angle and a rationale that is super relevant if you're able to do that with the custom build. The second is that the solution that you're trying to build really requires a super specific capability. And oftentimes what you'll see is that off the shelf have a tendency to be more generic, because they're trying to obviously fit a lot of different industries or a lot of different cases. And something like, just an example for this one, is if you're working in the public sector, for example, there are very specific cases on GDPR and on data security that you might want to build something very specific for that industry, for example. The third, and I think this goes without saying, obviously, if a use case is very specific to your business, and this we see more and more, even just with, let's say, the forecasting that Christian talked about that we did in the long term, it has to be really specific to that company's product line. That company, like, how do they call their different products or their portfolio? It has to be very specific. And so maybe an off-the-shelf isn't going to cut it, because it's going to cut too many corners, and it's not going to be broad enough to cover the entire scope of your company's products, for example. And finally, I think obviously the more you go custom, the more you can actually start working on unique data sources that maybe an off-the-shelf doesn't have access to. So obviously this is typically also a moment where you say, well, we could valorize this proprietary data set or overlay it with something else. And that is typically also a good indication of when to go for a custom build. But flipping the coin, there is always a good rationale not to go for it. And I think this is really, really important. I think oftentimes a lot of companies and clients get very excited about building their custom build, as you see, because of all these reasons. I'm going to share just from our experience, like when we see like what are typical indications or first signals of maybe when you should really challenge that questioning. The first is, and I've put it as a number there just to be very pragmatic, but if you're going to build something that ends up being used only around 30 times a year, and I'm saying this, maybe it's like it's going to be incorporated in your strategic cycle, and that only happens 4 times a year. Is it really worth building something that's only going to be used 4 times a year, even if it's a very, very, very strategic solution? Second, only a handful of users. I mean, in the end, if you're going to build a custom build, it's going to be a bit of an investment, obviously. And if you're going to have only 3 people using it in your company, is it really worth doing that whole investment in the customization? And finally, and I think this is an obvious one, and definitely one of Christian's main topics, but if the ROI isn't there, if you cannot justify why you're going to make the build, if it doesn't cover either the efficiency or it doesn't cover the expected revenue, why even spend on it if there's just no case behind it? So yeah, just to give you a bit of an example here, I talk buy or build like it's back 10 years ago, but obviously that doesn't apply. Like it gets a bit more nitty gritty when you get into AI. There's a whole spectrum of partnerships that you can get into, from, we call it power on, which really is the off the shelf, all the way to like custom build it. And I think what we want to say here is there's really not a complete black or white. Sometimes it's worth saying, look, we want to use an existing model, but we just want to tweak the front end application. So obviously that might be like an extension of the solution, or we want to be just customizing one angle of the semantic layer of it. So there's definitely a lot of layers within each of these rationales, and you'll have to be pretty knowing like what exactly do you need to change, what exactly do you need to alter, and that's part of also the prep of any build that you want to do, to know which of that layer it is that you want to change. So the model layer, the data layer, the semantic layer, or the application layer.
All right. So next we will, and I'm going to step on it a little bit here. Next we when you're building custom, you really want to make sure you keep business and tech teams in sync. And in AI, there's really more important reasons for that than in previous product builds. That's because Gen AI technology, really outcomes that you might get from Gen AI. So imagine a recommendation can have a sort of squishy nature that are notoriously difficult to benchmark. But if you have clearly articulated success criteria and give that exposure to edge cases to your engineers one way or another, they will be able to iterate and optimize really quickly. I think, if you've had a test with ChatGPT, even, in your own time, and you said, hey, this answer is okay, but it's not great. There's a lot of ways in the back end to optimize those answers. There's a lot of ways to strengthen the logic. And if the engineers really understand the business need, then that you're able to get there a lot faster in that moment. So here's two examples that we have. We've created tools. If you've been following BOI content, we do a lot of autonomous innovation engines. What those do is they process insights and develop concepts. That's really simplified, but a deep insight can be difficult to define. What makes a deep insight? So you have maybe in our portfolio tool, hey, this we can cross-reference different data sources, but what data do we use? What are we trying to get out of it? What makes an insight that comes from that good? What makes the way those insights are cross-referenced into a recommendation good? So as you can start to see that, hey, that these are difficult to really benchmark. Additionally, when you have a concept, what makes a great concept? Ultimately, the way that we sort of combat this is making sure that the logic is exposed to the user.
Awesome. So I'll take one of the hot topics out there on how do you actually build your data strategy and what are the right data sets to take into a build. So whether or not you're building a whole new software or just an agent or a workflow, really the main message we want to say is like, don't overrate too much your internal data for now. And I think the reason why we come up with this learning is that, and rightly so, we should be proud of the data that we have as a company. And obviously that's an asset. However, sometimes we can get pretty locked into the fact that we have to use this internal data and we must use it because otherwise whatever we're going to build isn't going to be up to par. And I think that can be quite handicapping for building something that works and something that has the right outcome. So just to give you 3 examples, what does that mean in the way that we look at data strategy is saying, look, first and foremost, you have to know what is it that you're building for, what outcome you want. And based on that, often you might need to look outside of your own 4 walls and look at other external data sources. So for things that you don't have access or there's publicly available information that would really help your model or your answer, etc. The second would be that we often, sometimes even looking at our own data or data sets or external data sets, we overlook unstructured data for now. I know this is a no-brainer now that we look at LLMs, but oftentimes I'm going to give you an example, but your Nielsen IQ reports or your the really expensive Mintel reports that you've paid for, they're just sitting there and we haven't really found a way to incorporate them in a solution. But I think these are typically kind of like gold mines that you want to be tapping into as new types of data sets that can really push your solution forward. And finally, I think it is about also finding ways in which you can start combining that different data in a unique way. So oftentimes, what we've seen also interesting is that you might have one data set internally, but that's not completely perfect or it's not full. And so you could actually combine it with an external data set that actually is filling in the gaps or that you're actually merging them together so that the data source in itself becomes much more useful to you. And just to give you an example of how that process can look like this actually comes from one of our projects, but when we look at data sources, it's a strategic step at the very beginning, and it is important to know really broad, like thinking big again on what are all the different data sets that could be relevant for the outcome. So on the left, you see, for example, we've evaluated 50 different data sets. Some of them were internal, but a bunch of them were actually also external. From there, we then have to do a prioritization of, well, what are the ones that are really relevant to a core element to drive the outcomes we're looking for. And from there, I think we'll talk about it again later in the webinar, but that step of relevant data versus what's the MVP data is a really critical step, because oftentimes we have the feeling that more data is better data. And if we don't have 15 different data sources, this results won't be good. I'd really like to counter that, because I think you can drive a lot just with 1, 2, 3 data sources at the very beginning, because you have to prove the value of your solution first before you start scaling it to a lot of different data sources, which will make it much more complex. So in this case, we were looking at 4 different data sets that we included in our MVP, which is already pretty big for an MVP, but that I would say wouldn't go more than that.
Yeah, and what I'll add, and the other side of the coin is people tend to underrate what an OpenAI API or integrating with any of those sort of more off-the-shelf models can really do for your solution. Yeah, we have people who love to activate their knowledge base that's been sitting around gathering dust forever, and all those custom studies to their products they pay for. Next, I'll be talking about designing your solution, and this is a lot about going deep on context. I think we've seen some UX designers in the chat and some product researchers. When we see that people don't spend enough time in design, that can really ensure the success of a given product. So to start, you want to understand this context by going deep with domain experts. Ultimately, you are looking to understand exactly how they think, their approach, all that institutional knowledge, in order to ensure you can have the best outcomes for your product. You also want to understand the surrounding business context of the way that they operate today. That means both what they do, what they could be doing, and who they serve in the org. All of those pieces will really help you understand how to create a great AI solution. I think it's kind of no secret in most AI use cases and applied AI today. It's a workflow capability. It's something that helps your business move in a particular way, faster, better, cheaper. So when you're going deep into user context, these are the types of questions that you'll want to ask yourself. First of all, who are the users? There are in a lot of builds we do, there's typically the people that are using the tool, clicking on the tool, but also who they serve, and we'll get into that in a second. It's important to understand. What are the current pain points in the workflow of today? Often there are opportunities, both when you really understand that workflow and the pain points, how do we make it better today? Now that's critical for adoption, but also understanding opportunities of where we could, have new ways of thinking in that workflow and how it serves the business. We like to think about, to Emily's previous point, what data might people use today if they had infinite time? And we say infinite time because suddenly with AI and the things that you can do to interpret, process and interpret data, you are able to get everything you need from data in a click. That's why we like to think, okay, how can we get outside the box on what data could support a given process? Then you want to think about when and where you can add the most impact. So specifically, this helps you understand the sequencing of your build, which Emily will get into, but also it helps you understand, okay, if there was a chief feature that we need, this will help us prioritize that. And finally, what's the way that we can seamlessly fit into a given process? And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but I think 2024 was the year of the AI pilot, and we saw a lot of pilots fail. And when you really consider these questions, you can see that you'll be able to design a solution that will really get adopted and drive value. But it's really important to take the time in this phase. Now, when implementing AI and what your designed solution can do, we find people think a little too small. AI has a lot of different capabilities. There's a lot of different types of AI, and ML and predictive AI and what have you. In agentic solutions, so in a solution where you have AI playing different roles, we'll say, there's endless opportunity to be creative and optimize the outcomes. And if you vary what those agents are doing, then really you can move a lot further, faster, and you can create something that people will actually love. So different ways that you could use AI in the same solution. I'll have some examples here. You can build trust. Often adoption is all about trust. How can you show that the data you are activating, for example, is worth trusting? Maybe you go to a source. Maybe you show the thinking behind an interpretation of data with features like even a chatbot. Next, how do you process, harmonize, and interpret dissimilar data? This is a big one for us. We try to be really thoughtful about those data pipelines, because you can extract insights from unstructured data, but maybe you could also, for example, put it on a time series, and then suddenly you have an additional piece of information to educate your machine learning models. And then you can take those machine learning outputs and incorporate it with other pieces of data, interpret it, and generate recommendations from it. So there, you kind of get that end-to-end view of completely different ways that you can use AI and vary those features for interesting outcomes. Finally, we like to point out, and this gets to that surrounding business context, when you have a solution, sometimes there are really easy wins in helping adjacencies in the business. So what I mean by that, so say you have an insights team, we build you an insights tool, but the way those insights get used is by a marketing function to help them write more effective romance copy, we'll say. If you have that on your radar, you can create outcomes that help those adjacent teams and the teams that the tool was indirectly intended to serve move a lot faster and more effectively. So let's talk for a second about interfaces, because there's so much emerging in AI around how we actually interact with it. So when you want to create something that is adopted, you have to be really thoughtful about the and your designed interaction across the business. So what does this mean? There's a lot of options. We've seen things work that maybe don't have an interface, or maybe it just is a Teams chat. That's something that people already have built the muscle, and I don't need to have a new login, for something. Maybe this data product actually just integrates with something I already use. That gets to that sort of different layers of build buy that Emily was talking about before. And maybe you have a completely new mode of interaction where you can have developed some multimodal interactions of how you can really drive value, maybe in the field, for example. The big area that we're looking now in this is collaborative AI. AI is intended to serve teams. We don't want, so what are ways that you could push AI to be more of a partner to a team and not even think of it as an interface for one person? Kick it over to Emily.
And I'll wrap it up with obviously it's a very big learning. We try to cut it into like something digestible for this webinar. But everything on like actually building and then scaling the solution, I think what we've learned is you have to start small, but you have to know ahead how you're going to scale and what that means for your solution. So if I kind of deconstruct that learning, you can go to the next one. I think we do. I think if you look at that statistic that's on the slide, 15% of AI use cases deliver 80% of the value. So that's something that was found out by Johnson and Johnson this year. I think it's right to say that there's a lot of hype and a lot of people are trying a lot of things, but don't really think it past pilot stage, perhaps, or are not thinking about the outcome or the impact of the solution appropriately. So this is all the learnings that we've been sharing until now, kind of help you make sure that you're actually building for success and building for impact. And where it also starts with us, I think it's more important in that sense of practically speaking. We think that you really have to start small before you go and scale. What does that mean? Is that we want to avoid data perfectionism super early on, because obviously, like, you could spend a lot of time going on and building your data pipelines perfectly and making sure that it's all complete. But first, you want to have your POC. And maybe you don't need to use all your internal data. You use external ones, just as we said, or you try to find different loopholes or workarounds to actually test what you want to test, and then see if you can prove value with a POC before you even invest in any like back-end or front-end development. And that's super important because obviously you don't want to be creating something or already investing in an MVP or even a pre-scaling when you haven't really proven that you're driving any value. So that's one thing. But the other thing, and I think it's this what we've learned over the past few years, is that this step between POC and MVP is super crucial. And not only because it goes from proving your concept to actually building something that's worked that you can put in the hands of the users, but you have to think about how you're going to build your MVP in a way that it allows to scale. Because sometimes what we've seen is that maybe the MVP was really hacky, and that's okay, but it hacky in a way that it really inhibited all the scaling afterwards. That means that if we've proven something, we built a solution, but then it's impossible to scale because all the codes were super manual or there was no automation in the data pipeline. And therefore, like, the data science team that is picking up this MVP has to kind of start from scratch. And so that's just a huge step and a huge barrier that you're adding on top of building something new that already has a lot of uncertainty. So that's why we say, like, when you think about your MVP, make sure that you're thinking of the MVP architecture already as something flexible and modular, for example, so that you can really start building as you go and building something that already works at a smaller scale. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to scale. And that's something that we really want to give you. And that illustration on the right, you've probably seen it before, but it really also means that in AI, you might need to make really small steps instead of like planning ahead with a huge release. And then you don't get there because a lot of things don't work. So that's on your MVP before scaling. And finally, a third learning on our scaling is that we know that there's a lot of barriers, and we could spend a whole webinar just talking about how to scale and what are the barriers to scaling. And obviously, like, on the left, you see the four big themes on why the biggest pitfalls, like strategic barriers, compliance, data, and tech foundations. But we do want to focus on one, which is really close to our heart and our experience, which is the people and adoption barriers, because that's where we, especially with the types of use cases that Christian was talking about at the beginning, so those higher like growth, those new solutions that maybe haven't been tried and tested out, but that have so much potential in growth, usually it's the people side that will be the most difficult, because you are going to have to speak to people that maybe have never built a solution before. You're going to be speaking to the head of marketing or someone of a business unit that isn't part of your data team or digital team and doesn't really know how things are built. So how to avoid that? The first thing, you really want to make sure that the solution that you're building is tying into your existing workflows. So you're thinking about how it ties into the people, their processes. Is it something that they need to download? Is it something that they're going to incorporate into their strategic meeting? Think about that so that you know that up front, so that there's no drop off in the user side. Then obviously you're going to have to make some really strong storytelling of your new solution. As we said, you might be talking to people that just haven't used this before. You're doing something completely new. Make sure your storyline's solid. Third, and I think this goes to my point, make sure that you're driving fluency in AI build. So actually driving the lingo of what is a POC, what's an MVP, how do we test, what's a data pipeline, how do we make sure that things are productized, etc. So these are all words that maybe your counterparts internally won't know. So make sure that you're building those in as you're working towards it. Fourth, building that business case. We know that's super important. In the end, you're going to have to convince on this thing is going to drive value in the bottom line, top line, but it is going to drive value. Make sure you have your numbers ready. And the last one is obviously you want to be onboarding the right departments and users at the right moment, even at POC level. So for example, with Christian, we were working on this this product build, and we realized that actually we had 4 different departments that could be potential users. So we tried to involve them actually during the POC phase. They were giving us feedback. So the people from like the CMI team, but then there was also those from like the different like analytics team, and then the leadership was actually a user as well. So we're trying to get all those users on board super quickly, even if they're disparate because of the complexity of your solution. And that being said, I'll want to wrap it up and our learnings today, and we will stop talking and start answering questions in a second. But on that note of people and adoption and scaling, I think from our perspective, the key takeaways that we want to give you are the following. So if you can click that, first, you really need to think bigger than only looking at efficiency and adoption. And why is that? Because in the long term, also workflows will change. We will be starting to integrate agents, new solutions, or even AI and AI models into our workflow. So these will end up changing, and it's super important that we have the people behind them on board. Then we want to make sure that the way that we're implementing things are more creative. So as we said, we want you to think bigger beyond just the obvious automations and efficiency drivers. And finally, that obviously outcomes are more diverse. So what we've seen is that AI has so many different uses in their interactions, and if you're building one solution, you might actually be piggybacking on another platform, and actually you're tying into another workflow, and you have to know where your outcomes are, what they are, and how diverse they can be in advance. But I don't know if Christian, you want to say anything before we go on to the Q&A.
Yeah, I'll just say we tried to give some practical ways that to provoke bigger thinking, and we urge you, especially that one that we see the most is people are trying to do today's thing faster, and how do we how do you avoid that? So with that, thanks for joining. I promised you a screenshot slide that is here, and we can start to answer some questions. I see the chat is active.
Yeah, maybe I can pick up one already, and then get started.
Go for it.
So Sean wrote that, and I like this question, that there's a lot of people also like Ethan Malik who advocate for using actually more generic tools rather than always trying to build custom builds that actually end up underperforming. And his question is like, where do you see custom build solutions tend to perform worse? So happy to take that unless you want to go for it, Christian.
I'll let you go. You picked it up, but I have something.
So first of all, we definitely agree with that. I think where we see that models work better is when you're trying to replicate something close-ish to an LLM. What I mean is that we've seen a lot of companies try to build their own LLMs or try to tweak an LLM so that it fits their company setting. Usually those don't work because in the end, the GPT or the foundational model that you're using is overperforming. And we fully agree with that notion. I think where we see the value of custom build is when either you're building a workflow on top of existing, like I'm just giving an example, like a workflow on top of existing LLMs. Let's say you're trying to make some like an insights engine, something that's able to like digest a multitude of different data sets and come out with interesting insights that are relevant for your insights team. You might want to have like 5 to 6 different agents that have very specific tasks that you have to tailor because they are tailored to the data source, to your industry, to your company setting. And so obviously that is usually something where we do see the value of adding like that agentic overlay that is custom built over existing LLMs.
Yeah, I'll just add, we see and I'll try to answer another question on what we mean by build in the same sense. So we see, there's a massive difference, maybe a fundamental understanding if you're starting your AI journey on the difference between enterprise AI and conversational AI. So yes, ChatGPT can help you write email. We would never build you something to write an email, but we might take those insights Emily is talking about. We might take data you have on your customers to go through, many steps. So to answer the question, yes, an agentic workflow, but probably something with a little more support from different data sources that are, intentionally selected. Probably a little more processing and interpretation from those data pipelines to write an email that makes, that drives the most value. And hopefully learns as it gets better. So one of these, that kind of gets you to an idea of what we mean by build. Is the place where we see it really standing apart is in those data pipelines and the way data is used. I think technologists have a tendency, and forgive, I don't even know how hot this take is, but technologists have a tendency to want to build the one model to rule them all, to make it, I put something in and it gets something out. There's a lot you can do with the reasoning model, but ultimately we are seeing sort of value left on the table in those agentic solutions where you can have these different roles being played in a given, we'll say, workflow.
Okay, I'll pick another one from Sanjay. What are the risks of vendor lock-in for off-the-shelf solutions? So obviously, this is a constant risk, and I do think there definitely is risk on that. Obviously, you have the risk of, for example, rising subscription costs, or the fact that you're actually buying it on like a black box model and that you're actually unable to tailor in long run when your needs are changing, for example. Or that you'll end up having like lots of switching costs if you're trying to test out a new solution. So fully agree that there is some risks in vendor lock-in. I think what we see as a good way to counter that lock-in, and this is obviously just first thoughts, but you definitely want to make sure that the solutions that you're using like support existing models or formats that you are already using, so that you're not locked into something super specific that you don't know how to use. Also, I think what we see more and more is the ability to take an API first approach. So to actually go for the API first, because that allows you to maybe more easily switch in and out by just locking in onto their API, rather than actually building it into like taking it as an off the shelf, and to make sure that you have more control. So yeah, there's lots of other things on like legality and things, but just these are my two things on vendor lock-in.
I'm seeing a lot of controversy over the skateboard. I did over the skateboard slide, the MVP.
It's a car slide. It's a car. It's not even a skateboard.
Let's go to it. The skateboard to a car.
Yeah.
So the point, and this is an old slide, so I didn't think this would be that provocative. The point is, you can't build a car tomorrow. So are you going to build a wheel or a skateboard? Ultimately, we see, and this is something that is different with AI, where you can build something that's useful really fast. So this is an old diagram, but it's increasingly true in AI. Take an agentic orchestration. You have something that processes, that extracts insights from unstructured data sets, and then you have a big plan for what it does with those, that maybe you automate the way you launch products. We talk about autonomous innovation a lot. The point is that you can start with the thing that extracts the data, and that has value all on its own. So the point is, hey, what can I get first that starts to get you through those gates that I see people talking about in the chat, that it drives value. Now, the caveat, and probably where the people who have a problem with that is that sometimes a POC, I would say it's an organizational problem. That's why we talk about those human barriers. But a POC, maybe doesn't have the pizzazz that the car would. And that ultimately is a human problem. That ultimately is a storytelling problem. If you can paint that path, and that's why we say that you have to have that clear path to scale, then you can say, okay, look, this is just what we can do in the amount of time we have. We might not even, we want to make sure we can deliver some of that value as soon as possible. Ultimately, that's the language people want to hear anyway in the first place is, hey, I am minimizing that path to value. So I hope that helps.
Clear. Maybe I'm picking up a question from William on any examples of how to structure the success criteria during a prototype to create a compelling case to move into MVP and to convince the stakeholders. So maybe to your point, William, in my experience, there are no perfect structures of these are the success criteria, and you always have to look at, I don't know, time saved or whatever not. I think what's important is that you align with the stakeholders before you go into a POC or that prototype, the way that you called it, and say look, we are going to prove out this, and this. And we need to prove that, for example, we're able to forecast to a certain degree. We can prove certain validation of that in even if it's not possible yet, we're going to find a workaround to validate that these are relevant, or we're going to be able to size the opportunity in a certain way that is relatively accurate, or the model that we will make will have a certain accuracy ratio. So these are typically things that you define up front. You do the POC, get the data, get the proof points, and then that's how you decide to go into MVP. If the proof points are strong enough, and if you kind of validated what you agreed to validate at the beginning, that's when you get into an MVP. If you're not there because either you weren't able to prove it, or they're not high enough, you just haven't gotten to that level, that's when you then don't continue to an MVP.
I see a question I really like. Any examples of how to structure the success criteria? This is Williams, during prototyping to create compelling case to move to MVP and convince stakeholders. I'm going to deconstruct that a little bit. Convincing stakeholders will be all about the business case. That's why, we say, hey, design for context, but think about the business impact first. You need to be sure. The only way, people think in business cases, and you have to try to do what you can to ensure you're driving those different. Oh, did you? I think if you just answered this one, excuse me. But I will add in that case that you can deconstruct it and ensure that you have, for example, proving out, and I think, forgive me, I was reading it so closely, for that you can prove out different, for example, machine learning model using historical data.
I think we said the same thing, just differently. Yeah. All good.
It's a good question.
I think just to that point, if we stay in the POC versus MVP, I think it's an interesting conversation to have. I think Michael brought another question, which is, in our opinion, what's the main difference in building and running a POC versus MVP? What are the differences and similarities? I think it's obviously we have our own lingo, and maybe people will disagree because you have defined it differently, as we know. It's a language thing, but in my perspective, the POC is the proof of concept. So you want to prove that what you're doing can work, that means for me the biggest difference is that you don't need to have a working, tangible solution to prove that it works. Like, for example, in some of the things that we were doing, what we needed to prove was the ability to extract relevant insight from 5 or 7, or I think it was 5 different data sources. That was our POC. And so obviously you don't need to build the whole front end. We were just trying to see with the different agents that we were building, are we able to get to something coherent or not? And once you have that, then you start going into more MVP phase where you build the overlay, you build something that is actually usable without, so that the model behind already works.
I see one from Carl. Do you have specific example on how to use or connect RAG, retrieval augmented generation? A little less of a how to connect it, but I'll say that what's important when you're thinking through the way you chunk out your data is the insights you're looking to draw. And sort of there's often this step of a POC within a POC where you are ensuring your vector database is giving you the answers you need, and you need to this is where that tech team and business sort of making sure you're in lockstep becomes really important. Again, often we're generating generative AI, we're generating results, and that's where we want to make sure that those are hitting the marks that they need to, so that you can adjust later in the process if needed. To that end, I'll answer another one I saw. Who do we typically work with?
I was going to take that one, but go for it.
Yeah, same point. Me and Emily are always on the same page. Sometimes too much. And so for the who we work with, we talk to a lot of CTOs, and that's Chief Transformation Officer, as well as sort of the technology and digital people in the org. Often, if you run a team and have an idea and have sort of a carve out in your AI strategy for it, we can build growth tools that serve teams. A lot of times we will come in and think about the strategy at sort of the business level, and then we will come up with ways that say, hey, here's a really promising next step on something that we could build to add the maximum value to start. We really start from there. Anything to add, Emily?
No, I think, in the end, it depends on a bit the use case that you're building for, on who we're talking to. I think it has a huge transformational element, like it's going to reinvent the way people work. It's definitely on the transformation side, plus the digital side. Sometimes we're going to build a very specific capability, like, an insights engine or the ability to do demand forecasting. And obviously, you'll have probably usually two counterparts. There's always the counterpart of digital, and then there's always the counterpart of the user, or that. So it could be the CMO, or it could be the head of the CMI team, or it could be the head of demand gen, or whatever it is you want to call it. So there's always two parties together, and that makes it great because they're working together, but also obviously makes it harder because you have two different parties to work with.
I see an interesting one from Gray. That I'll take a crack at it. I don't know if my answer will be completely satisfying. The question is, AI is moving so fast, it's unreasonable to assume that building something now will have value into the future. Do we agree, disagree? If disagree, what would we say to them? So I think that obviously we see, it's very visible the way that AI is evolving. When you see things like reasoning modeling come out, worst example, when you see ChatGPT finally is great at taking something out of an image. But you can see how fast it's moving in, especially a lot of these consumer contexts. The way that we build allows us to typically plug into those models and ensure that we're capturing the value as they progress. I think there is a question of, I am not necessarily a buyer that there's going to be this one model that will suddenly be able to do everything. I do know that as we build in the commercial logic that's specific to your business, we get so much more out of those models that are pretty good today, and that we're seeing that we're adding value in the short term. I think the bigger question is, are you willing to risk being wrong and getting left in the dust? And so, when the way we build is we're solving problems and we're solving them today. That problem doesn't get unsolved if that AI, if AI advances. So we're helping our applied AI to us is really looking to drive value as fast as possible and with the biggest vision for long-term return.
Ooh. I see we're almost running out of time. We were going to do this in 45 minutes, but there's a lot of questions still remaining. So we won't be able to go over all your questions. I can already tell you that. Maybe I'll just take one last one, and it'll be the one from Al. So do we recommend building an all-encompassing data lake of structured and unstructured data in anticipation of massive future value? I think the answer is, we're not the experts on data lakes, but in our view, you don't actually need to. What we see happening more and more is that it's just important to know where you're storing that data and you have access to it, whether or not API. I don't think you have to all centralize it into a data lake. There's so many ways that in which you can actually reach that data that are maybe not centralized. But I think definitely like knowing what data you have is important. I think that's most important first. And then obviously having your data strategy. So what are the relevant data sets that I'm going to use for each? But centralizing in a data lake is indeed a huge endeavor. And we see more and more companies actually going away from doing that. Okay. And I think for 1 minute left, I don't think we can take any more questions, Christian, unless you have a very
I got one on the buzzer. How do you help a client identify promising use case? 5 things. Uses data, activates data you have, has a business problem that is core to the business model. It solves a user problem, has a clear vision to value, and minimizes time to value. So you kind of get the short-term, long-term there. Those are the ways that we typically evaluate use cases. Ultimately, you have to build a business case, get into the details, but that's why that teacher exercising works. Fast enough. Look at me now.
Yeah, we're gonna have to go now, but it was great having you all. Because I don't think another question in 45 seconds is possible.
No shot.
We'll see you again, as we said, especially on that number 6. We could do another webinar on it. So be braced. There might be one upcoming. Otherwise, happy Thursday to you all from Belgium.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you so much for your questions. This was a fun one.
Okay, bye.
Bye.